We're going to look more at a term that is becoming more commonplace in our industry, which is the circular economy. Really, what is it? What does it mean for mining in the metals sector? Such a crucial thing that's only going to be getting bigger as we go forward. We're happy to be joined by two industry leaders that are going to help us. Pardon me. This is what happens when you talk for 5 hours straight. They're going to help us get a better understanding of what recycling can mean for the industry. Both of these individuals contributed to a fantastic piece in the Northern Miner in the December 21st issue. I encourage everyone to go back and read that. It is such a valuable source to understanding what is such a critical issue. The two people I'm alluding to, first we have Andrew Cheatle. Andrew is a geoscientist. He's a seasoned CEO and director within the mining industry and a graduate of the Royal School of Mines Imperial College in London. Andrew's 30 plus international year career has encompassed the senior and the junior mining sectors based in London. He's based in London and Toronto. He's a sought after advisor to the mineral industry. He specializes in technical assessments, corporate development, and investments. Andrew sits on the board of Condor Gold, Troilus Gold, and also volunteers on the advisory councils of the Development Partner Institute, the Canada International Finance Corporation, Africa Local Economic Development Partnership, and as a director of International Women in Mining. He's passionate about the mining industry's role in community and national development, and we are happy to welcome him back to the Global Mining Symposium. He's an important part and an important contributor to the Northern Miner over the years. So welcome back, Andrew. And joining Andrew, we also have Elizabeth Frieil. Elizabeth is a sustainability strategist and impact investor. She's driven by the potential of business to tackle humanity's grand challenges. A self-proclaimed conscious capitalist, her mining industry work supports junior explorers to mature mid-tier producers from the field to the boardroom, and developing future-ready corporate responsibility and risk management approaches. As CEO of boutique consultancy 4P Solutions, her geographic reach includes the Americas, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Outside of the industry, Elizabeth is also a senior associate with venture capital firm Active Impact Investments, where they are advancing seed stage tech companies that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions through smarter resource consumption. Elizabeth is based in Vancouver. She holds an MBA from IE Business School, a certificate in sustainable business strategy from Harvard Business School, and a BA in political science and global development from Western University. Andrew and Liz, welcome to the Global Mining Symposium. Thank you for coming to speak with us on a critical topic for the industry. Welcome to you both.
Anthony, thank you very much. And greetings from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Andrew, you seem to always be in another part of the world. So now you're in Tanzania. There's no keeping you down. That is for sure. Well, extra thanks for joining us from even further away than from the last time. And Liz, where are you joining us from?
I am sadly in Vancouver and a little bit jealous of Andrew right now.
Vancouver,
honestly,
not quite as exotic, Liz, but still a beautiful, beautiful city. So
indeed, I can't complain.
Very good, very good. Well, listen, I alluded to it off at the top. The two of you did a joint contribution to the Northern Miner in December, such a powerful article that I wanted to make sure that I did my best to bring you on to the Global Mining Symposium and get our even bigger global reach that we have with this platform, because it is so critical. And let's start with defining the terms here. I mean, we hear the term often enough. We're hearing it more and more every day, but maybe give us the core idea of what a circular economy is and why it should matter. Why don't we start with you, Liz, and then we'll come over to Andrew.
Sure. So I think before we talk about the circular economy, we should mention the term linear economy. So the idea of a linear economy is essentially the way we have been living and the way we've been using resources in recent modern history. So that's a take, make, waste linear model. And the idea of a circular economy is essentially offering an alternative to that unsustainable status quo. It's about providing for human resource needs, but within the natural constraints of a finite planet, a way of living that can actually be sustainable. And so in a circular economy, we don't look at resources as something to just be consumed. where we basically destroy their value after a single use. We recover them in a regenerative cycle. And the goal is to keep all resources functioning at their highest potential for as long as possible. You can think of it as applying the waste hierarchy that you may have learned in elementary school, reduce, reuse, recycle, before you consider disposal. And what that means is, moving forward in the future, we're going to need to think about new business models, and especially innovation in our business models, innovation in our product design that makes use of materials as much as possible that can be endlessly recycled, like metals.
Excellent. Well, and I'll bring it over to you, Andrew, but I'm going to pull out one of the points from the aforementioned article, just to give our audience a sense of what we're talking about, what the potential here is. From your article, it's mentioned one mobile phone can yield as much gold as 1 ton of 1 gram ore. And to put this in context, there are over 14 billion mobile phones in the world. I mean, the scale of this, if we get this right, is just astounding, Andrew. What does it mean to you? Why does it matter? Why should it matter to a mining executive?
Yeah, Anthony, it's a great point, right? I mean, there's more mobile phones, need 1.5 times more mobile phones than people on the planet. Right? It's mind-boggling. It's not just the gold in those, it's also obviously all the rare earth elements. And I'm sure Liz and I will chat a little bit later about some of the latest robots that Apple have got recycling all of these elements. But back to your overall question, why does it matter? Let's put it this way, as a society, we are very well used to recycling. Yeah, I mean, as a child, all those years ago, we used to recycle milk bottles, for example. It always went back into society and recycling. Sort of inspired by your love of 80s music, we sort of referenced that vinyl gets recycled. Vinyl is all of a sudden back, and it's being, as the records are used, they're recycled as well. So recycling, reusing is something that we actually are quite used to in many parts of our society. During my MBA thesis, I studied the strategic aspects of a company called Nucor, which is the United States' largest producer of steel. They don't own one mine. It's tens of mini mills across the states. And I use that example because what I think is going to happen with the circular economy, if we think 5 years ago, it's something that we were very, almost like, oh, don't mention that. It's almost an anti-mining phrase. Whereas now we're sort of seeing, well, hang on a second, recycling, reusing, repurposing is becoming more and more mainstream. And that means ultimately that the products we have that we produce in mining are going to be in competition with those that are recycled. Mm-hmm. We're going to see a lot more recycling. And that also comes into importance when people think of the provenance. Where has the stuff that's in my iPhone come from? And I'm going to use that little comment to go back across to Liz, because I know Liz has got all the information about actually where Apple is at the moment, right? So I just thought that it was just the chassis and the MacBook Air, for example, that was all recycled aluminum or aluminium on this side of the Atlantic. But Liz, it's so much more, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the chassis is a really good example, but you can see if you look more closely at Apple, they've been working at this for quite some time already. And in particular, if you look at their disassembly robots, which is, I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but so they started with the either Daisy or Liam, I think it was the Daisy robot, then it was the Liam robot, and then most recently the Dave robot. And the Dave robot is fascinating because that one basically does 100% rare earth recycling from the taptic scene. So, on your cell phone, on your iPhone, when you push and it does like a vibration sound, that entire screen, the taptic engine, if you will, all the rare earth in that is 100% recycled already in 2021 in Apple. I think that's a really awesome data point that you should be paying attention to.
Wow. And, for a lot of, raw materials producers, maybe they're getting the heebie-jeebies when they're hearing this. What is your take, Liz? Is there still 5-10 years out? We still need to pull metal to the ground, I take it. If we have a growing population, if we have more developing countries, economically developing and increasing their need for metals, how does this factor in? What does it mean? What's the balance going to be between recycled material and how much demand that can meet, and what the need will be coming from raw producers?
I think that's a really fantastic question. And it's important that we note that even if we were to go 100% circular tomorrow, which the technology is not there, the logistics are not there, but even if we were to do so tomorrow, we still wouldn't just get rid of raw extraction overnight. The demand is too great. You know, the human race, we keep growing, we keep procreating, we keep consuming. As we see a growing middle class, we see even more consumption that's accelerating. And so I don't think that mining needs to be threatened, but as Andrew alluded to earlier, we will be competing. And, you know, that's just going to push us harder on our ESG journeys, I think, in the coming years, perhaps more rapidly than we had expected.
Now, Andrew, you come at this from, I mean, Liz has a background already kind of coming out of, you know, consulting and looking at things from a more ESG focus.
Yeah.
You come out of it as a mining executive. So take us through your journey. How did you arrive at this point where you've seen how critical this is and you're devoting much of your time to understanding it and becoming an expert in it?
Yeah, so we do have to go back a number of years, certainly when working with the PDAC, for example. It became clear that as the government of Canada was looking at sort of creating the new Canadian mining plan, that it has a very large component of a circular economy in it. So now we realized that governments of our nations, and particularly Europe as well, are starting to build policy and process of circular economy that will come to impact us. And I don't think, you know, as a miner, I love mining, there's no doubt, you know, and we can talk a lot about that. But I also think we shouldn't be afraid of recycling. You know, we shouldn't necessarily want to create waste. You know, at the end of the day, we're on a finite rock spinning around a sun, right? So we are finite ultimately. I think it just makes it a better place for us to be recycling, but also to recognize that mining's part in that is going to continue to be putting new material in, but also we're going to face competition for our products or for selling our products. And that then drives us into how sub-mining companies are even reimagining themselves. Instead of just being a mining company, now they are a metals and mining company, or in the case of Anglo-American, you know, always one of my favorite examples. They sort of say, well, hang on a second, are we going to be a minerals and metals solution company?
Yeah,
and part of that, yeah.
Maybe I'll hit that point from your story because that's a powerful quote from Mark Cutifani, the CEO of Anglo American. He says, if I look back over the years, we have characterized ourselves as a mining company. Today, we characterize ourselves as a metals and mining company. And tomorrow, we could very well categorize ourselves as a materials solution company. It's a fascinating point. Liz, you've mentioned that, you know, this is not something we can transition to right away. Can you give us more detail on that? What are the bottlenecks? Also, if you can touch a bit upon, I know like the famed Horn smelter in Canada is being used to recycle a lot of copper, but there is emissions that go with that, right? They're melting down the copper. There's some carbon. Is that a bottleneck? How does that factor into this equation?
To be honest, I can't speak very much to the specific technical bottlenecks, but perhaps what I could say is, speaking of the challenges, you know, what is going to be hard or why we aren't moving faster on this. First, I think we're still not seeing it incentivized. We're not seeing it incentivized by the market. We're not seeing it incentivized by compensation structures within particular companies. We're not seeing it incentivized either by our downstream users just yet. You know, I mentioned the Apple example. There's actually a lot more out there. I think perhaps more interesting than Apple, because we're talking quite small volumes there, is the automotive industry. If you just do a quick Google search, you will see how many of them are already creating their own closed loops for metal recycling. They're doing that either in-house totally, or they're partnering with other companies. And interestingly, the partners that they are choosing aren't mining companies. And so I think that's a really important thing to note. Perhaps another thing is that, you know, we still don't do full life cycle assessment when we consider the value of our product. And so in that sense, it's not something that we can easily compare with a, you know, virgin metal on mineral versus recycled. I also think that another important challenge is, you know, we don't have a lot of competition, right? There's not a lot that's forced us to do this. Another bottleneck important to note is probably government involvement. I talk about incentivizing, you know, by the market or inside a given company, but research and development, innovation, this stuff takes time and it takes an awful lot of resources. And so I think there could be a role for government to incentivize that, particularly if they could bring us together with some of the, clean tech boom 2.0 is ongoing right now. If we could bring these two worlds together, that would be fantastic. And therein, another bottleneck would be, how bad we are at collaborating internally in industry. You look at our counterparts in oil and gas, for example. I think we have so much to learn from them, and I won't go on too much, but one of the great examples is industry's ability to come together and pool resources, stop duplicating efforts in-house, and let's work together and see this as a pre-competitive issue for the mining industry. I'll stop there.
No, I think that's a great point. And I think most people I talk in the industry realize that, and they want more cross-fertilization from other industries, but we're not always, we kind of realizing it's only part of it. It's still not happening as much as we want. So that's great insight. Listen, you guys, both of you are really engaging our audience. We're getting some really smart questions coming in. I'm going to turn to them before I get back to some of mine. Here's one. Why are we still thinking that recycling and extraction are mutually exclusive? Isn't it all part of the same value chain? Recycling has been part of the mining value chain for decades. Isn't that the case? Liz or Andrew, who would like to take on that one?
Liz, over to you.
I mean, yes, yes, it's 100% the case. If you, Anthony, you mentioned our article, and we threw some examples in there. This is not new. Recycling is not new at the household level. Recycling is not new at the industrial level. No way. I think we're just coming out of perhaps a period of modern history where it hasn't been valued and incentivized. And that's not unique to mining. We're just having a bit of a wake-up moment right now that we need to go back to what were much more natural ways of being, ways that respected resources and the natural world a bit more. It's like we've got a bit lost along the way, if you ask me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really, really good point, Liz, in that it's important that, and I find it particularly encouraging now that leaders in our industry are openly talking about the circular economy and engaging the whole recycling industry and trying to understand how they have to pivot, to use a word of the day, as they go forward. And one of the other examples we gave in our article that just absolutely floored me. I think you first mentioned the company Li Cycle, so Li Cycle, so lithium cycle, if you like. And what was fascinating is sort of went and took a deep dive into this company, which has recently set up lithium battery recycling plants in Rochester and Mississauga. And when you sort of delve into the company, who's behind it, the people behind it, all of a sudden you suddenly find that, we'll just get the name of the company exactly right here, TechMet. But the founders of that and the backers behind that is the Perulis family. Now, of course, they're very well-known mining people for many, many years. The CEO is formerly a lithium miner tied in with Hatch, for example. So we're seeing some mining executives already sort of transitioning, sort of realizing, well, hang on a second, we can take our entrepreneurial skills, it's still metals and minerals, and let's get into sort of setting up some recycling, if you like, in the whole chain of batteries here. But I think that's the only one we've seen so far where there's examples of lithium battery recycling.
Fascinating. I think I can combine, we have two questions here that are similar. I'm going to do my best to kind of combine them together because it's around inefficiencies in the mining industry. And this individual is pointing to wastewater tailing ponds. And then another question around, could we not use tailing ponds for feed in the mining process? And I know you mentioned this in the article in the Northern Miner. You talk about what's in the tailing pond. Liz or Andrew, can you give us more details on what the potential there is to take that piece of waste possibly in the future out of the mining process?
Yeah, I can jump in just very quickly. I mean, just one of the reasons I've been here is to be at the Tanzanian Mining Summit, and there's some fabulous examples about tailings dams in country where the water from the tailings dams are being desalinated. So we're sort of making the tailings dam dry, if you like, taking the water out of the tailings dam, which has got safety implications as well. And that water is then being recycled back in as processed water. Right. So, but it's required a good desalination process as opposed to, say, just evaporation or just seepage into groundwater or through into the natural river streams. But very interesting, that sort of example of recycling.
Can you see that scaling, Andrew, or is that a very specific case where that was economic and feasible?
I think this one was, tailings dams in general, right? I mean, if we look at tailings dams, that only last year we saw the publication of the Global Tailings Dam Standards. Right? So if you're a mining company wanting to go forward, investors very carefully now look at those tailings standards. They prefer, obviously, drier tailings, preferably not upstream. So that sort of recycling, drying out the tailings dams, I think is and reprocessing that water is very much a way forward for us.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Another one here. I hadn't thought about it in this way. This one comes a little bit of creative thinking to me anyway. The audience member comments with regards to the circular economy, should we be thinking of municipal garbage dumps as the new ore bodies, the metals, the plastic, etc., that are sitting there? Great way to reduce GHGs. Is that will we in 10, 15, 20 years at some point out see garbage dumps as ore bodies?
For sure.
Liz, you're nodding your head. Yeah.
I don't know when, but for sure. It's like, all the metal we've ever pulled out of the ground is still here somewhere on the Earth's surface. And as it becomes more and more difficult to access that which remains within the Earth, I think it's a very logical thing to suggest that we will turn to that, especially as the technology gets to where it needs to be for us to be able to extract the metals, the minerals that are in garbage dumps in an efficient way. A great example in China, there's some studies that have been done. They've already figured out how to mine e-waste, urban mining, as they call it, 13 times cheaper than raw extraction of copper. Wow. Already. And that was a few years ago, I think.
Yeah. Another good example is Johannesburg, South Africa, for example, where there's quite old now, centuries old, but absolutely massive tailings dams. So it's not quite urban waste, but as the city has grown and has started to encroach upon these old tailings dams, they've all gone through recycling and extracting gold at well below a gram a ton. But that ground has then also been repurposed for either factories or for housing development. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it can be looked at in many different angles. Right?
Mm-hmm. Do we have, Liz, you pointed to that because we are getting questions here on the cost comparisons of extracting in the traditional sense and using a recycle program to get it. Do we have global numbers? There's specific cases where we can extract and say, okay, the cost of recycling is lower in this case. But are we at the point where we have the kind of data and the metrics that we can say, here's a global average for what it costs to recycle a pound of copper? Is that data out there yet? We don't have that.
Not yet. Although I believe in our article we quoted it was a study that I think Accenture did back in 2016 on the cost for, Andrew, I don't know if you recall this, but the cost of extracting the gold for a single cell phone, or no, 1 gram, I think it was 1 gram of gold. 41 cell phones have to be recycled for an entire ton. Like just the visuals of that was the same cost, an entire ton of rock versus 41 cell phones to extract the same amount of gold. I think it's really, sorry, I'll just finish that. I think at this point, we don't have global numbers, but also that it's so case by case. It's case by case on the e-waste recycling, for example. It's also very much case by case at the asset level.
Yeah, it's a great question from the person. It's, again, we cited an example of Nucor, and I'll come back to that. I just want to make sure I get the numbers right. So in 2019, Nucor recycled 16.1 million tons of scrap, right? Selling into a highly competitive market, still is highly competitive with narrow margins, and earned revenues of over $22.6 billion.
Yeah,
it's massive.
Powerful.
Yeah. And similarly, ArcelorMittal also, right? 30% of their iron is already coming from scrap. So clearly it's cost effective. to some extent.
Okay, well, and thanks, Liz, for that, because that we have a reader here that mentioned Nucor and said, but is that indicative? Does that tell us anything about the future of mining, or is it just kind of an idiosyncratic case? But you're seeing it as it is telling us something. It's not a one-off.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Where does someone, it is an emerging market. I mean, we in the Glacier Resource Innovation Group, we also have data businesses with our Cost Mine and Mining Intelligence product. We've certainly looked into trying to get some data going on scrap and recycling. It's a bit of an opaque market. Difficult there. Where do you guys go? Are there emerging resources on this front where mining executives can go to try to track where the scrap market is going and how things are being priced?
I think the overall driver, Anthony, is still just the commodities market, right? Yeah. So are there metrics, of course, in gold mining, we're all used to, the all-in sustaining cost, right? Yeah. Do such comparable statistics exist for the scrap industry? It's a fabulous question. We certainly didn't come across any, but I'm pretty sure they are definitely going to be coming along. But at the end of the day, it's, the overall market for the ultimate commodity or metal is also going to drive the sector. But no, I haven't seen any standardization of production data, as it were.
Maybe just points that we're still at the early days here, and that's also the opportunity. Yeah. Is there other industries that we can learn from, Liz and Andrew, on areas where tech provided some examples of how to get things done in a more efficient way?
Yeah, I think, I already mentioned oil and gas. We have a ton to learn from. And that's very much about the competitive versus pre-competitive, the need to work together, the need to, collaborate to invest in the necessary technology, research and development, as well as, I think, getting comfortable with showcasing our problems to the world, which is historically not something we do. Like, why are we not more circular at this point, or this point? If we understand what those issues are and we share them with the world, particularly with the entrepreneurial ecosystems, the clean tech ecosystems around the world, then we have a much greater chance of basically finding solutions, technical solutions, with some of the brightest minds of tomorrow, particularly young people.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Fun one here, a serious one, but I detect a bit of humor in the question. It says, first a comment. Have you ever seen a metal recycler go out of business?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm sure that they do, but it's also a very long-standing industry, right? So just the same as mining companies, I'm sure there are some of those that simply just exercise not brilliant business plans, but certainly, just come back. We keep coming back to Nucor because it's such an amazing example. That's a company that since the 1960s has just become the largest steel producer in the States.
Well, and I think that question is getting at, and you've read it perfectly, Andrew, is what really is the business case here on the recycling side? And if we're not seeing the kind of bankruptcies that we might see in other industries, is that telling us something? So Liz, over to you. What is the business case if someone was trying to wholeheartedly go into a circular play on metals?
Yeah, the business case is great, and there's a lot of directions you can go with it. But I would say the first one right here and now that I think you need to be the most concerned about is, as I mentioned earlier, the fact that we're starting to see some of the folks that we rely on the most to buy our products developing their own closed loops in-house or with others, realizing that consumer-facing industries are facing a ton of pressure. So two types of pressure. First, you have the investor pressure, and that's real. We face that here inside the industry. I'll come back to that. And then second, public pressure, the rise of conscious consumerism and the desire for sourcing transparency. Consumers, and increasingly so, again, with the next generation, want to make responsible, sustainable product choices. They want to have a small carbon footprint. They want to know there are no human rights abuses or, horrific biodiversity impacts or any of that. And they know that there's no room for infinite raw extraction on a finite planet either. And then coming back to the investor piece, I think that can be felt very directly within industry, with our own investors increasingly. The pressure around accounting for our scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions in production is going to be really important. I think that's going to impact decisions more and more. Social impact, labor management, human rights, communities, social risk, geopolitics, the risks associated with many operating regions, and then the opportunity of clean technology as well, that's making recycling more efficient and more cost effective. Andrew, I don't.
Yeah. No, I mean, let's just take lithium again, right? It's obviously always like to sort of say it's the metal du jour, right? Very topical. We're seeing a lot of investment going into lithium, but we're seeing obviously this massive electrification of our transportation. So on the one hand, we've got a small startup in Mississauga, Rochester, sort of advancing recycling, which is in one sense really very innovative. Yet if we could go across to the other coast, to the West Coast, we're seeing companies getting into lithium brines, lithium sediments, clays, sort of strategically positioning themselves to all the battery manufacturers. So we've got sort of this almost two parallel things going on, and the drive to have more lithium in the market at this early stage has quite quickly caught the attention of some entrepreneurs to do the recycling, to go circular on the lithium batteries, while at the same time we're forging ahead with primary production of lithium. I find that exciting.
Just to add to that, Andrew, I'm not sure if you guys saw the article last Friday, I think it was in the CBC, of Summit Nanotech, a woman from oil and gas who's figuring out how to pull lithium out of the brine in like old oil wells out in the tar sands, which I think is a pretty cool example of circularity. She's essentially taking what is seen as waste in a sister industry and finding ways to pull the lithium out there.
Yeah, it's another very good point. And sorry, Anthony, I just wanted to
No, you go ahead.
Because one of the other trends that we've just sort of wanted to talk about is, you mentioned oil and gas industry, is also getting into the energy industry. Right, so it's now sort of coming into what is traditionally our preserve. I say ours as miners, because we're producing the raw materials that are going to go obviously into the batteries and electrification. But we're seeing major oil companies at the same time saying, "Well, we're energy companies. We're not oil companies anymore." And so I think we're going to see oil companies coming back and investing in the mineral sector.
Very interesting. And mining companies, as Mr. Kudafani points out, maybe branding themselves more on that metal solution side. Big change coming our way. Another interesting comment here from one in our audience. And by the way, we had a bunch of questions on battery recycling specifically, but I think you kind of went there on your own and covered that off. But this one, again, kind of the ingenuity of our listeners. Would you be able to provide any examples where a manufacturer has built into their product development the ease of capability to recycle back into their product as part of the circular economy? Has that been going on? That's a really interesting point.
I think, Liz, once again, back to your thoughts on the automotive industry.
Yeah, for sure. Again, there's a huge number of auto companies that have done that, and we put it in our article. I don't remember exactly which names, but they're a huge number of them. Basically, all the big names are doing it now. And I'll also refer back to the Apple example. I mean, this is not new for them. They're on their third disassembly robot. When you trade your old iPhone in to get a new one, for example, that goes straight to the disassembly robots, and they're pulling it all apart. Yeah. They own those loops already in-house.
Fantastic. Outside of auto and Mac, pretty big market caps, have a lot of budget for R&D. Have we seen it go down to companies that don't have that, or is it still is that sort of internal loop only accessible to companies with those kind of market caps?
That's a great question. Don't have a specific answer for that, Anthony, but it's what I would imagine is if you are those large market caps, you can be your own ecosystem.
Yeah.
Whereas for smaller companies, smaller business minings, you'll have to be sort of, for example, selling your scrap steel to the Nucols of the world, or some sort of scrap cooperative.
I also just thought of another, Xerox. They've been doing it for years. Rolls-Royce, I think it is, with the jet engines. Philips with their light bulbs. Actually, I don't know why those didn't come to mind before. There's a ton of examples. And again, those are not new examples either.
There you go. Fantastic. Well, it feels like in listening to both of you speak and reading your piece that the march of evolution within the economy is unstoppable, and this makes sense in a lot of different ways. I think it is prudent. I think you both make that point in the article with a very strong closing, that it's very important for executives to understand that this is the reality that we are facing, and it is growing, and we have to carve out our business cases in this new reality. Any final thoughts on how you see this playing out in the next couple of years in terms of how maybe the speed? Do you think that, let me put it this way, do you think the speed at which the circular economy will advance is even more rapid than what it would be the general consensus right now? Or are the bottlenecks that you talked about off the top, Liz, such that it might be in line with expectations or even lag expectations a bit?
I think that will might be stronger than people expect. And I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the will globally. I also think that we still have the realities of the technical bottlenecks though.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'm hoping that the will goes a long way, particularly in fostering more collaboration, as this is it's a nascent theme across many different industries. It's not just mining, and there's hope in that. We can be working with our counterparts within our own supply chain, but also in other supply chains that run parallel in certain humanity.
Yeah, and I think that as the mining industry sort of becomes part of that circular economy, we actually are very, very, very well positioned, right? Over the last 5 years, you and I've had a lot of conversations around how ESG, CSR has become part of our business, how we are becoming very, almost not to use the word, almost proud in some ways that we're in an industry that we can make a very big difference to the lives of many, many people. We can actually have a material impact on SDGs in the Decade of Action, for example. I think so, because we are going that way as an industry, so we are also still going to be able to Liz's point earlier, to still be able to present good credentials in terms of the provenance or the sourcing of fresh material. I don't think it necessarily means going forward that, oh, mining is bad. Mining will, I think, and I hope, become good. So I'll leave it with that.
An optimistic thought to end on. Listen, to both of you, thank you so much. We are out of time, but the questions continue to come in, which speaks to the level of engagement and how important this topic is. I was a little bit, trepidatious that we might get some people angry. We're not getting any of that. We're getting so many questions. We can't get to them all. But it speaks to both the importance of the issue and people's awareness for it and the acceptance. I mean, our audience here is largely people that are ingrained in the mining industry, and they are open and curious and want to learn more from experts such as yourself. So thank you very much for taking the time. We also did get comments, Laura and Mladen, on the back end. We had a bunch of comments there for people that want to see the article that Liz and Andrew did in December. So maybe let's get that link up and we will post that for everyone. Thank you both very much for taking your time. Andrew, travel safely back to your home in London. And Liz, be well in Vancouver. Thanks for taking the time for us.
Thanks for having us here, Liz. And thank you very much as well. Thank you.
Cheers to both of you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.